I still remember the first night I walked into that office like it was a bad dream I couldn't wake from. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. The linoleum floor squeaked under my shoes, and the faint hum of the ventilation system was the only thing keeping the silence from being absolute. It looked like any other call center I'd ever worked in, or at least what I expected a call center to look like. Cubicles neatly lined in rows, headsets hanging like plastic ornaments, and an empty break room with half-empty coffee pots. Nothing about it seemed unusual, until the first call came in. The phone rang from a desk in the middle of the room, a single desk standing stark against the grid of cubicles. My fingers hesitated above the receiver, and a cold, creeping doubt slithered up my spine. I looked around for someone, anyone, expecting a supervisor, a coworker, maybe even a janitor. There was no one. The office was completely empty. I swallowed hard and picked up the receiver. A quiet static filled my ears at first, then a whisper so soft I thought I imagined it. "My name is Elliot." It wasn't my name. I've never gone by Elliot. I've never even known anyone by that name in my life. My pulse spiked, my stomach dropped. The whisper came again, faint but clearer. "Elliot, pick up the call." I froze, and then I looked at the caller ID. My own number, not the office line, not some prank from a friend. My personal number, my phone at home, my voicemail, every contact I'd ever saved. It was ringing here in this empty office and somehow connected to me. A shiver ran through my body. My mind raced, trying to explain it. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the office phone system had some twisted rerouting error. Maybe someone was playing a joke. Any logical explanation I could summon felt pathetic against the reality of it. The sound of my own number dialing me in a room that shouldn't even exist. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to run. But my feet were glued to the floor and my fingers tightened around the receiver, as if letting go would be fatal. The whisper came again, insistent, almost coaxing, and every instinct I had screamed to leave. At first I thought it was a prank. A twisted initiation. Some sick way the company tested new employees. But when I turned toward the door, I realized it had locked behind me. The latch clicked into place, sealing me in a space that should have been safe, ordinary, and yet had already begun to feel impossibly alien. The lights flickered once, twice, and the hum of the ventilation system seemed to shift, suddenly louder, deeper, almost like a pulse. The phone rang again, sharp and deliberate, and the whisper followed. I knew then that whatever I had just stepped into wasn't on any map. It wasn't listed on Google. It wasn't in any directory, and yet it was waiting for me. I found the job through one of those listings you scroll past 100 times before you even notice. "Night shift call operator needed. Immediate start," it read. The ad was sparse, almost lazy, with a nondescript email address and no company name, no website, no LinkedIn page. Nothing you'd expect from an actual employer. I remember thinking it was weird, but at the time, weird was better than nothing. Nights were quiet, money was guaranteed, and I'd been unemployed long enough to overlook the red flags. I emailed them. The reply came almost instantly. A PDF of rules, an address, and a time, 10 p.m. sharp. No phone call, no confirmation from a recruiter, just the flat instructions to report and clock in. I did what anyone desperate would do. I saved the address and chalked it up to a lucky break. The building itself didn't make sense. The street was real, but the office block looked empty, abandoned even, except for one glass door with a faint blue glow behind it. The lobby was sterile, far too quiet for a call center. There were no receptionists, no security guards. Nothing but a metal desk and a single keypad with a note taped above. "Enter code 1479. The moment I pressed the keys, the doors opened smoothly, but the silence that greeted me made my stomach knot. Orientation should have been a flurry of paperwork. Introductions, a tour of the floor, but none of that existed. There was no HR, no welcome packet, no coworkers, just rows of cubicles waiting like coffins in neat alignment, headsets dangling like plastic ornaments. It was functional but empty, and the emptiness was unnerving. I walked past the cubicles expecting someone to greet me, someone to confirm I was in the right place, and the sound of my own footsteps echoed back as if the building was swallowing itself. I asked questions that went unanswered. I tried to call the number listed on the ad from my phone. It rang internally, straight to the lines I hadn't yet sat at. No voices, just waiting. Before my first shift, I overheard, or maybe imagined, snippets of conversation from others who had been here. Rumors, really. Employees disappearing mid-shift, never to return, their desks cleared by the next morning. Some said it was just a high-turnover job, a boring night shift nobody wanted, but others hinted at darker possibilities. The whispers lingered in the empty hallways of my mind, crawling under my skin even before I was on the clock. I remember standing in the break room, staring at the coffee pot, my mind circling. I considered leaving, walking out and pretending I'd never seen the listing. But the curiosity gnawed at me. Something about the quiet, the emptiness, the strangeness, it pulled me in, like I needed to see it for myself. I clocked in. The first night hadn't even started yet, and already I felt the shift of normalcy into something off-kilter. The ordinary act of reporting to a new job had been twisted into the impossible, and despite every instinct screaming to run, I walked to my cubicle. I sat down, headset in hand, and waited for the phones to ring. The first night started quietly, almost deceptively so. The hum of the fluorescent lights above became a kind of rhythm, and the faint buzz of the ventilation system was oddly comforting. I sat at my cubicle, headset ready, fingers drumming nervously against the desk. Time seemed elastic, stretched out and heavy, like the night itself had weight. Then the first call came. The line clicked, the small indicator light blinking insistently. I lifted the headset and said, "Hello, this is..." before the voice cut in. It wasn't a hello, not in any language I recognized. Fragmented syllables, words twisting together like a jumble of foreign radio static. I frowned, confused. "I'm sorry?" I asked, heart starting to thrum faster. The voice stopped abruptly. Silence. Then a low, drawn-out sigh, almost human, almost a groan, and the line went dead. I shrugged it off. Maybe the system was old. Maybe the calls were routed wrong. These things happen on night shifts. The next call came almost immediately. I picked up, my hands shaking. "Did you eat the eggs this morning?" My breath caught. My eggs. Breakfast hadn't even been mentioned anywhere. The caller, their voice soft, deliberate, distant, knew. What?" I stammered, confusion and unease tightening together. "Who is this?" The line went quiet for a long moment, then a whisper. "I saw you." I hung up, my pulse hammering. The mundane rhythm of taking calls, the monotony I had expected, was broken. There was a sense of watching, of observation, like the phones themselves had eyes. I tried to call the lobby. "Hello, is anyone there?" My voice sounded small against the emptiness. No response. The only answer was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, rising and falling like they were breathing. Desperate, I asked out loud, to no one in particular, "Is there a receptionist here?" A voice answered from behind me, a cheerful, slightly impatient tone. "You should take a break, you look tense." I spun around. The lobby was empty, completely empty. "Who's there?" I asked, panic creeping in. Silence again. My own footsteps echoed back at me, faster, heavier. Then the calls increased. Some were unintelligible. Others were oddly banal. A man asking for a fax number that didn't exist. A woman reporting a wrong connection. But tucked between the mundane were whispers. Details only I could know. The color of my sweater. The way I always tapped my pen when thinking. The book I left on my nightstand. I started writing it down, the details, the anomalies, the things that didn't make sense. Every entry made the office feel smaller, tighter, more suffocating. And then came the call that nearly made me drop the headset. "Did you lock your door before you left the apartment?" The voice asked, calm, detached, familiar in a way that made my stomach knot. I froze. How could they know? I had walked out 20 minutes ago, locking it as I always did. I muttered, voice trembling, "Who? Who is this?" No answer. Only the faint static and that feeling, like the voice was inside the room, not just on the line. Minutes passed. Hours, maybe. The night stretched endlessly. Every call was a roll of the dice. Some were harmless. Others like little traps, threading my life into a narrative I didn't understand. And somewhere between the hum of the fluorescent lights and the ringing phones, I realized this wasn't a normal night shift. It wasn't just work. It was surveillance. It was invasion. It was personal, and that first call, the one about my eggs, was just the beginning. By the third night, I had started keeping a log of every call, not because I thought it would help, not because I believed it could, but because I had to do something to anchor myself in reality. Each entry listed the time, the number. a brief note on what was said and any details that seemed out of place. And almost immediately a pattern began to emerge. It started subtly. The first few numbers seemed like coincidences. Someone would call asking for a delivery that never existed, or another reporting a problem at an address that matched an old abandoned building across town. I checked the news online, stories about strange fires, accidents, sudden deaths, and at first I thought I was stretching, forcing connections where none existed. But then it got worse. One number, logged at 11:47 p.m., corresponded to a young man who had been hit by a car the very next morning. The address matched the location where he had been walking. Another call from an older woman asking about a faulty gas line correlated almost word for word with an article about a leak that exploded later that night. The coincidences weren't coincidences. I began cross-referencing every call with online obituaries, police reports, even social media accounts. Each time the numbers seemed to predict tragedy, or at least to coincide with it in some horrifyingly exact way. The mundane calls, the wrong numbers, the complaints were interspersed with these fatal predictions. I started muttering to myself, trying to make sense of it. This can't be real. It's impossible, I whispered one night, my headset clutched in sweaty hands. That's when the janitor appeared. I hadn't noticed him before. He was a shadow moving silently among the cubicles, mop in hand, eyes distant. Don't get too comfortable with the numbers, he said without looking up. The floors, they aren't real, I blinked. What do you mean? He shrugged, emotion almost too casual for someone speaking about the impossible. This place, it's a loop. You think you're watching it, but it's watching you. They pick, they choose. You don't leave unless it wants you to. Before I could respond, he turned a corner and vanished. No sound of the mop hitting the floor, no rustle of clothing, nothing. I was alone. The more I logged, the more I realized. The calls weren't random. They were selective, tailored. Sometimes they hinted at someone else's life. Sometimes they mirrored my own. The caller ID, the timing, even the phrasing. It was as if the office itself were keeping track of me, recording my every habit, my routines, my weaknesses. By the fourth night, I stopped taking the calls at face value. Each one was a test. Each one a thread weaving me into a tapestry I didn't want to be part of. I started avoiding certain calls, letting them ring out, but the ringing never stopped. If anything, ignoring them made the next set more insistent, more pointed. And then came the night when a caller knew something no one could possibly have known. The scar on my left wrist. The small burn from a coffee spill 2 weeks ago. My pulse quickened, my hands shook, and for the first time I realized I wasn't just observing the system. I was a participant. I had crossed some invisible threshold. Every number now felt like a countdown. Every name whispered over the line, a reminder that this wasn't a job. It was a machine, and I had become part of its mechanism. The office routine, the cups of lukewarm coffee, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, the repetitive clicking of the keys, was just camouflage. Beneath it was something alive, something that tracked, predicted, and targeted. And it wasn't long before I understood the most terrifying truth. The calls weren't just happening in the world outside. They were coming for me. By the fifth night, the building itself had started to betray me. The cubicles, once neat and predictable, seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking. Hallways stretched longer than they should. Doors that had been there the night before vanished. And the office lights flickered in patterns that weren't electrical. They were deliberate enough to make my stomach tighten. I tried to keep track of the layout, to map the floors in my notebook, but every time I thought I had it memorized, something changed. The break room, where the coffee pot had always been, was sometimes a kitchenette with new appliances, sometimes just a dark alcove. The vending machine that should have offered snacks stared back at me empty, the buttons frozen. I could hear voices, soft, low, sometimes whispering my name, from rooms that were supposed to be empty. Attempts to reach the outside world failed spectacularly. My phone, normally a lifeline, lost signal the moment I stepped into the building. Texts went unsent. Calls rang endlessly, always answered by static. Even my emails bounced back with errors I'd never seen before. It was as if the building itself had swallowed all communication, creating a bubble in which only the office and its impossible network existed. I wasn't alone, though it was impossible to tell how many were actually present. Employees before me, according to the whispered stories I managed to piece together from forgotten forum posts and half-deleted social media threads, had tried to leave. They didn't make it past the doors. Some were found days later, or not at all. Desks emptied mysteriously, chairs pushed back neatly as if nothing had happened. No explanations, no notes, no signs, just absence. Sometimes I'd catch movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow between cubicles that vanished when I turned, a janitor, or someone dressed like one who would nod and smile and then dissolve into the walls. My mind began to question everything. Was the office alive? Was it conscious? Did it know I was watching it, as much as I was watching the calls? The most unnerving part wasn't even the spatial distortion. It was the sense of intention. Each shift, each phone call, each flicker of lights felt orchestrated. I could almost sense a pulse, a rhythm guiding the building and the lines coaxing me, testing me. And then the calls became more personal. Where once they were cryptic or seemingly random, now they referenced details that could only exist within the walls I now couldn't trust. The office hummed in tandem with each ring, each vibration through the desk echoing across the floors like a heartbeat. I started to avoid the calls. I tried to silence them, to ignore the ringing, to let the lines go dead. But it didn't matter. The next call would always be worse. Quieter at first, teasing me with what I should have ignored. Then insistent. Then direct. The line between building and phone blurred. The office wasn't just a workplace anymore. It was a predator, and I was in its grip. By the end of that night, one thing became horrifyingly clear. The environment, the shifting floors, the vanishing doors, the voices, they weren't incidental. They were part of the same system that had been sending me those calls all along. This place had a mind, a will, and it had already chosen me. The calls became impossible to ignore. By the sixth night, I no longer waited for them. They demanded my attention, insistent as a pulse hammering through the walls of my skull. I'd sit at my cubicle, headset in hand, and before I could even touch the receiver, the line would spark to life. "Turn around," one whispered once. My heart slammed against my ribs. I froze. Slowly I twisted, expecting someone, anyone behind me. Nothing, just the sterile, humming office, its walls seeming to pulse with some unseen rhythm. Then the whisper continued. "Don't answer the next call. You won't like what happens if you do." I yanked the receiver away from my ear, my palms slick with sweat. My mind screamed for rationality. There had to be a glitch, some audio interference, but rational thought no longer applied here. The calls weren't random. They weren't mistakes. They were following me, tracking my every movement. I tried to tell someone. I called my friend Mark, who had always joked about my obsession with conspiracy forums. "Mark, it's the job," I whispered, glancing nervously at the blinking lights. "They know where I am. They know what I'm doing." He laughed nervously. "What, you mean your boss? Chill, man. You're just stressed." "No, you don't understand," I insisted, voice shaking. "The calls, they know everything. Last night one even told me what I had for breakfast. Before I ate it." There was a pause on the other end. "That's, weird. Maybe you need sleep," he said uneasily. "I'm serious, Mark. They're predicting things, following me. I don't think it's just the building, it's the calls, the system. The line went dead. My blood ran cold. Then in the next instant, my phone rang again. Not the office line. Not Mark's number. But the call ID displayed his name. I answered slowly, dread clawing up my throat. "Mark?" I whispered. A scream, distorted and digital, ripped through the receiver. I dropped the phone. The sound was impossible, human but wrong, warped, stretched. My ears rang. The line went silent. When I looked back at the display, it read only, "Unknown." I could feel my pulse in the ceiling lights throbbing through the cubicles like a warning. I realized then, the calls didn't just report events. They manipulated them. Reality was bending around them, bending around me. Every next call became a rehearsal of terror. Some whispered what I would do in the next hour. Some hinted at my fears, my secrets, my failures. One line told me almost playfully that I should have left the office 2 hours ago. Another, calm and matter-of-fact, said I was standing in the wrong cubicle and should move before it was too late. I started mapping them, logging not just numbers but sequences, patterns, timing. The more I recorded, the more the calls felt like part of an architecture, an invisible algorithm whose design was both meticulous and malevolent. I noticed correlations. Certain phrasing matched specific events. A pause, a hesitation, a drawn-out vowel. The calls were rehearsing me, predicting my actions, shaping my choices. And yet, no matter how much I tried to resist, the inevitability pressed closer. The whispers weren't just auditory, they were mental. Tiny suggestions lodged in my thoughts, guiding me toward decisions I didn't want to make. By the end of the night, I understood something horrifying. It wasn't just a call center. It was following me, feeding on me, shaping the world around me with each ring, each beep, each whisper. I stopped talking aloud. I stopped questioning the calls. I tried to become invisible, blending into the cubicles and fluorescent hum, hoping the machine couldn't see me. But the calls found me anyway. There was no escaping. And when I hung up the last line of the shift, the lights flickered and I realized I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I was part of the system now, watching, recording, tracking. The calls weren't just coming for me. They were rehearsing my end, step by step, second by second. By the seventh night, exhaustion had settled into my bones like a second skeleton. My eyes were raw, my fingers cramped from logging calls and scribbling details I wasn't sure anyone could believe. But it was in that haze of fatigue and terror that I finally understood. The call center wasn't just a building. It wasn't just a job. It wasn't even part of the world I thought I lived in. This place existed outside normal time, outside the rules that govern streets, doors, and phone lines. It was a construct, a loop, a machine feeding on attention, engagement, the simple act of being observed. Every call, every whispered detail, every number that matched a tragedy. It was a system, and I was part of it. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. Employees weren't merely workers, they were both operators and prey. Each of us maintained the cycle, calling, answering, listening. Some of the voices on the lines weren't even alive in the traditional sense. They were echoes trapped within the loop, feeding it with our reactions. The office itself had a consciousness or something like it, and it used us to maintain its existence. It observed, it tested, it fed. I turned to the audience, to you, though I don't know if anyone will ever see this. If you're still watching, I said in a whisper that seemed to vibrate with static, you've already entered the system. Every second you linger, every curiosity you indulge, it's aware. It sees you. It knows you're paying attention. It's feeding. The calls weren't just predictive, they were instructive. They didn't merely record events. They nudged, guided, manipulated. A hesitation, a phrase, a pause, even the act of picking up the receiver itself reinforced the loop. Every action, every reaction was part of its design. I remembered what the janitor, or whatever he had been, had said. The floors aren't real. Now I understood. They weren't just shifting hallways or vanishing doors. They were manifestations of the system, extensions of the machine's awareness. The office bent reality, shaping both space and consequence to keep the cycle unbroken. I thought about the calls I had ignored, the patterns I had tried to resist. It didn't matter. Resistance was anticipated. Control was never relinquished. Even trying to leave, to step outside, was futile. The building, the calls, the entire network of operators and prey, it was self-sustaining. There is a way to avoid being called next, I think. I've glimpsed it in logs, in patterns, in fragments of messages left by employees who vanished. But it's risky, convoluted, and I'm not sure I can explain it here without inviting attention. Some things once revealed cannot be unlearned. Some knowledge carries its own price. I don't know if sharing this will save me or you, but you need to understand what you're looking at, what you're engaging with. This isn't a simple horror story. This isn't a prank or a glitch or a nightmare that will fade with daylight. It's alive in a sense that makes biology laughable. It watches, it waits, and it feeds. My mind reeled, and I realized my only option was to document everything, to try and break the cycle, even if just for a moment. Cameras, logs, recordings, I would leave a trail, something concrete outside the loop in the hope that some fragment of truth might survive. The calls were still coming, still whispering, still shaping the space around me. But for the first time I felt a faint glimmer of agency, not much but enough to act. Enough to try. I prepared for one final night, one final attempt to escape, or at least to record what the system truly was before it claimed me completely. Every cubicle, every flickering light, every phantom echo was a warning. The line between operator and prey was razor thin. And if I fail, Then this is all you'll have. The record. The warning. I set up a small camera on the desk, aiming it at my workstation, headset in hand. Every call I had logged, every whisper, every impossible prediction, I wanted it all recorded, documented, tangible outside the loop. The office hummed around me. Fluorescent lights flickering like warning signals. Shadows stretching in impossible angles across cubicles that had shifted while I wasn't looking. I picked up the receiver one last time, fingers trembling. The line was silent at first. Then a faint static, followed by the softest whisper I've ever heard. Not a question this time. Not a riddle. My name. Spoken clearly, intimately, as though it had been inside my head all along. "I'm recording," I whispered into the headset, my own voice trembling back at me. "This is the truth. Everything I've said, everything I've logged, it's all here." Static grew louder, coiling through the receiver like a living thing. The air around me thickened, the lights strobing in rhythm with the faint ringing that had started somewhere deep in the building. Or maybe it was inside my skull. I couldn't tell. The camera recorded it all. The cubicles bending, the shadows flicking across walls that shouldn't exist. The impossible quiet punctuated by the phantom ringing of phones. And then the line came alive. One clear, deliberate ring breaking through the static, cutting through the hum of the office like a blade. I lifted the receiver. And now, I began, voice shaking, words barely leaving my lips. "The line is open," the sound cut abruptly. The lights blinked out. Static swallowed the room. My hands were frozen mid-motion. The camera, still recording, captured only the empty cubicles, the shifting shadows, and the faint echo of a ring that would not stop. I don't know if I survived. I don't know if the office exists in the way I remember, or if it has already consumed me entirely. But if you are seeing this, reading this, if you've made it this far, you are part of the loop too. Every interaction, every glance, every click draws attention. If I vanish after this, you'll know why. Leave a comment, share a theory, warn someone. But be careful. Some knowledge comes with a price.